If you think what is the iconic watch design of the modern era, Richard Mille is really the only correct answer. This watch is the most recognizable, most iconic, most innovative design of the modern watch world. You don't even have to be a watch guy. You can see what makes it great immediately. I've told the story before of how I got into super high-end exotic horology. In fact, I wrote it up for Hodinkee about a decade ago. But now's the time to really tell it again. I was in a used watch dealer's showroom, this is in about 2003, when I saw on his inventory list that he had a watch that cost over $100,000. Now at the time, I had literally never heard of this. It blew my mind. The only thing I could think of was that a $100,000 watch must have diamonds all over it. It must be jewels, because how could a watch cost $100,000 on his own? So I asked him, could I just see this? I can't buy it, but I'd love to see what a $100,000 watch is. And out he brings a Richard Mille RM003 Tourbillon. I strapped it on my wrist and lost my mind. This was the coolest thing I had ever seen. It fit my wrist like nothing else. It was just amazing. And I figured right then and there that I had to come up with some way to buy one of these, which I was able to about a year later. Now today, I'm bringing you an RM3, which I can't believe I've never reviewed on my channel. The RM3 is the very, very close brother to the RM2. It's basically the same, except the case is a little bit bigger and it adds a second time zone. But overall, pretty much the same things. They were released at the same time. These are the foundational Richard Mille pieces. There was the RM1, but those kind of came and went before anybody noticed, and 2 and 3 are what got the brand off the launching pad. All right, here is Richard Mille RM003 V1. This is one of the real OG original Richard Milles. This particular piece is in white gold. It is one of the first watches that Richard Mille ever made. Again, it's a V1 RM3 and it's piece number 11, and it's never been polished. So you can see some interesting patina here on the sides. Nothing ever really touches these because they're sunk in the case. So the gold has aged interestingly, and you'll see scratches all over it. So bear with it. This watch has been loved. This is why these pieces were made. And it's just so great to wear on the wrist that you don't want to take it off. Let's dig into some of the functions of the RM3. You have, of course, your time, and down here you have a 1-minute tourbillon. The movement, of course, was made by Renaud and Papy, famous for making complications for a lot of brands, but also as part of Audemars Piguet. Over here you have a power reserve. And over here you have a torque meter. So what the torque meter does is it monitors basically the quality of power coming out of the barrel. And as you see the power reserve go down into where it doesn't quite have enough power, you'll see the torque meter go out of that good zone and into the not so good zone where you know that you need to wind your watch. All of these were supposed to reference cars. This was Richard Mille building his brand. It was supposed to be a racing machine for the wrist. That was the slogan. And so the idea of having a torque meter, a power reserve, a tourbillon, and this function selector, which we'll get into, was the way of doing that. And you can see it in the design language, the cut of these wheels and things like that. Now, what makes the RM3 different than the 2 is that the 2 has everything we just discussed. The 3 adds a second time zone GMT function. So you'll see there's a sapphire disc here in the middle that has 1 through 12 on it, and it's advanced by this button on the left here. So you can jump it and get to your second time zone. Now, I find this pretty functional. I think it's cool. It's a nice addition. It's definitely not necessary, but it's nice to have, and it adds a little bit to the dial. The case, of course, has now become iconic. This is the Richard Mille case. This is where everybody kind of first got to know it. One of the true modern watch icons that has been designed. And so it's pretty cool to have one of these early examples where it came to be. Over here, as I alluded to, you have this push button selector for the functions. So in a normal watch, of course, if you want to wind it, and then you pull the crown out and you set the time. Here, Renaud and Papy and Richard Mille together came up with this really cool solution that's kind of like a gear shifter in a car. So you'll see right now the hands pointed at N, which is neutral. There's also wind and hands. Instead of pulling the crown out, you actually push this button and change through the functions. So neutral means that I can turn the crown, it's not going to do anything. Push it once and we're in winding mode. You can see the power reserve going up. While you're winding, the torque meter goes to 0 because the barrel is winding. And then, let's see, we're getting a little more power. If you put a little back pressure on it and just engage the barrel again, your torque meter registers. Now, one more push. Now we're in hand mode and we can set the time, which I'm not going to do because the time is right and I've been wearing this watch. And then one more push and we're back to neutral. This was the first time, I believe, that a function like this had been in a wristwatch, and it was a really cool thing. You know, buttons are great. We love to interact with our watches. Pulling a crown out doesn't really feel like an interaction, but anytime you get to click buttons, we all love that, right? So RM3 gives you 2 buttons to be able to mess with. Not a ton to see on the back of RM2 and RM3, except that this is a pretty cool sculpted back plate. These are all the gears for the winding system. Now I mentioned this is a V1. V1, of course, was the original. There was nothing else. This wasn't even called a V1 when it first came out. It was just called the RM3. And it has a base plate which is gray coated titanium. Now, later, they came out with a carbon base plate, and they called those the V2s. So then people retroactively called these the V1s. I tend to very slightly prefer the V1 because it already gets a little bit busy in here with this second time zone. You know, you've got these extra screws with the red and all these numbers going around. The carbon base plates have sort of like a random weave, and it tends to busy up the watch a little bit, which sometimes works really well. But again, in the RM3 where you've got a lot of indications in a small area, I prefer the V1 just to keep it a little bit cleaner and easier to read. Also, now that we're getting 20 years or so from the launch of these, and these are turning into sort of vintage pieces, the V1 was just the original, and it is cool to have the older watches. I mean, there's something cool about knowing that this is the 11th one made. So here it is on the wrist. And nothing is like a Richard Mille. They're just so good on the wrist. This is why the design is so iconic. Again, this one is white gold. It's pretty heavy. They actually only made these in 3 variants. There was titanium and rose gold, which were both equally priced. And then there was white gold, which was usually about 15 or 20 grand more. It was a weird pricing strategy. Who knows where they got that. They did make a couple platinum variants, but they were usually never on the price list, and they're really heavy. But yeah, it was definitely weird at the time that the titanium was the same as the rose gold. Richard Mille did a lot of interesting things with pricing. But here it is in white gold. I tend to really like the white gold RMs. They keep the sort of technical thing going because they are white metal, but they have a really nice polish on the edge here. The titanium ones are raw. They're just beveled because titanium doesn't really take a polish like that. And so it's nice to have that little bit of sparkle, and the weight feels really good, especially on these new straps. When these first came out, the straps were terrible and they used to kind of rip here and they'd fall off people's wrists sometimes. This I put on one of the new Velcro straps. Actually, Richard Mille USA told me that it was the first time that they had seen an 003 on a proper 3 Velcro strap. So that was pretty cool, and I think it really suits the watch. It makes it so that it's incredibly comfortable and nice to wear and unique. So that's the Richard Mille RM3. This is the 11th piece in white gold. Really a piece of history, an iconic design. You can see what makes it great immediately. You don't even have to be a watch guy to see that this is a super cool watch. And I think that's really ultimately the beauty of Richard Mille. You can knock them for a lot of things, but what they did is very important, and these early pieces are just awesome. So I was happy to share this with you. I can't believe I didn't do an RM3 before this, but better late than never. I'll be back with lots of cool review videos. Please subscribe, send it to your friends, share, comment. I really enjoy being able to share these watches with you guys, and I hope you get some enjoyment out of it as well. Thank you.